you're a doctor.
Yes.
Tell us the progression of your thinking on this and what it did to your life.
Yeah, absolutely. So trained at Stanford Medical School, then became trained as a head and neck surgeon.
Undergrad Stanford also.
Undergrad Stanford, medical school at Stanford, then went on to train in head and neck surgery.
Yes.
9 years into my postgraduate training.
How did you do in medical school and college?
Did well, was president of my Stanford class, graduating top of my class with honors in medical school, and went on to a very competitive surgical subspecialty, head and neck.
So I'm just saying that because normally I dismiss credentials out of hand, but these are real credentials and they matter, I think, to your credibility. Okay.
And I did what every good little medical student, wants to do, which is climb the ranks of that academic ladder. But, you
killed it.
Did well,
Yeah.
and I got to the top of that mountain, right? 9 years into my postgraduate training. And I looked around me and I realized that, patients in America are getting destroyed. Children, adults, the elderly. You're so distracted in your little surgical subspecialty, focusing on the ear, nose, and throat where I was, and you get distracted. You look around at what's happening in Americans, and our health is getting worse every single year. Patients in America are getting much sicker every year, more depressed. We're getting infertile, and life expectancy is going down in a country that's spending almost 2x more than any other country in the world.
So before we get into the details of what you did, tell us, of why you did what you did.
Yeah.
Tell us what you did. So
Yeah.
you spent your whole life working toward this goal. You reach the top, and then you decide not to do it?
Yeah. I'm in the operating room in my 5th year of my surgical residency, and I'm looking down at a patient in front of me who's on our 3rd revision sinus surgery. And, I know how to diagnose her. I know how to write the prescriptions. I know how to do the surgery. But what I kind of realized in that moment was I have no idea why this patient's actually sick. She has so many other health issues, prediabetes, arthritis. She's got some brain fog. She's got obesity, and she's got this sinus issue. And in my training, I was never, ever, ever taught to look at the whole patient, to look at how all these things are connected. And I was only taught how to, do the surgery and then bill for it. And I realized that there's a huge problem in how we're practicing medicine right now, which is we're ignoring the root causes of why Americans are sick. And we're profiting off of patients getting sick and then doing things to them. That's the way the business model of healthcare works. The way that healthcare, which is the largest and fastest growing industry in the United States, makes money is you have more patients in the system having more things done to them for longer periods of time. And when I kind of put some of these pieces together and realized that my training had totally, essentially incapacitated me from really understanding why patients are sick and how to actually help them thrive, I actually had to walk away from the surgical world because I realized that I was going to be making money off of essentially not spending time helping patients understand their health and actually just profiting off their illness.
So
I
9
left.
years into medical training at Stanford, you gave it up voluntarily.
On my birthday, 30th birthday, I walked into the office of the chair of the department, and I put down the scalpel and I walked away, and I devoted my life to why are Americans getting sicker every year? Why are 50% of American children dealing with a chronic health issue? This was less than 1% 50 years ago. Why is our health getting destroyed the more that we spend? And
so that's what did they say when you walk into your colleagues at Stanford and say, I'm giving it up at 30?
It wasn't really a conversation. I knew that I couldn't cut into one more person until I understood why Americans are getting sicker every single year. I think that the unfortunate thing is that doctors don't really understand because every level of our education is systematically focused on blinding us from thinking about root causes. We have over 100 medical and surgical subspecialties right now. And how you make money in the American healthcare system is you take a patient with 10 different issues and you send them to 10 different specialists, put them on 10 different meds, maybe they eventually have 10 different surgeries. You never actually are taught how to put the pieces together, look at the whole body as a system, which of course it is. And part of this is because, who are the people underwriting our medical education? It's the pharmaceutical companies. We are taught how to be very algorithmic and robotic in how we look at patients. And so ultimately I left the surgical world and I went down the rabbit hole of asking why. Why are we getting sicker every year?
It's just such a radical move to do something like that.
Yeah. I mean,
your whole life you're working toward a goal and then you give it up?
Yeah.
After 9 years?
Yeah. This is the thing that I understood and that I am working and we are spending our lives to evangelize for this book, Good Energy, is that the reasons why Americans are getting sicker every year are very simple. Americans want to be healthy. Americans do not want to die early. They do not want to see their kids with all these chronic health issues like autism and food allergies and obesity and prediabetes and 40% of teens with mental health issues. No one wants this, but the system is rigged against the American patient to create diseases and then profit off of them. This is happening across almost every lever of our major industries, from processed food to tech to pharma. And so really what Americans need to understand is that these trends can stop immediately. We need to understand why we're sick, which is our primarily our toxic food system and the ways that systematically several industries are profiting off of our addiction and illness. And if we can understand that and create very simple top-down and bottom-up strategies to address it, Americans will become rapidly healthier. And so as a physician, I took an oath to do no harm. And I took an oath to help patients thrive. And so the way that we can do that is by helping people understand the levers of corruption that are essentially keeping us sick.
I guess the reason I'm pressing you, and you're the sort of person, this is a compliment clear, doesn't want to talk about herself, which is great. But I think it's relevant because it speaks to the intensity of your commitment and to your sincerity. So you're giving up the prize, you're giving up the money, because you really believe this.
Yes.
And I think I just want to establish that at the outset.
Thank you.
Before we say anything more. So you're her brother. You're very close. I happen to know that. Mm. And you're obviously proud of your sister. She's president of her class at Stanford. It's the kind of thing like, oh, my sister's at Stanford. She's at Stanford Medical School. She decides not to practice surgery, the most impressive of all specialties. What's your reaction to this?
I called her and said she was a complete idiot. We were raised in Washington, D.C., right next to you, kind of conditioned to climb up the ladder.
Of course.
I went to Stanford. I went to Harvard Business School. That was what life is about, just kind of collecting those credentials. Casey, research at the NIH, as we talked about, top of her Stanford med school class. To me, that was it. And truly, and you hit on this, she had this is her life. This was her identity. This is everything to her. And she bravely stepped away with no plan, just from a moral obligation. And I thought she was a complete idiot. And what I know now, and what I've been radicalized on, is she has convinced me that this is the most important issue in the country. It's an issue of corruption that starts at Stanford Med School being 50% funded by pharma and not training doctors on one nutrition class. Stanford Med School, Harvard Med School, 90% of med schools don't offer or require one nutrition class. Doctors simply aren't learning why people are getting sick, which we'd all assume they do. 80% of the course loads in pharmacology. It's on how to take people that are getting sicker and sicker and manage those conditions, not to cure them. And that's a huge problem because that dynamic of the largest industry in the country is destroying human capital.
So as your sister is on one end of the equation, you're on the other. So you both have, you're from a community of strivers. That's what DC is.
Exactly.
And merit badge gatherers. And you've gotten two of the greatest merit badges ever.
Right.
HBS, Stanford Medical School. But you're all of a sudden finding yourself in Washington. Can you just explain your background a little bit?
Yeah. So Casey was a bit smarter than me on the biology route. I wanted to be contributing to politics from an early age and went to Stanford to go back into politics. Studied economics, political science, went straight back to campaigns after school. What I learned quickly is that then campaigns over, you work for the biggest spenders in DC, and I found myself across the desk from food industry and the farm industry. The farm industry spends 5 times more in DC than the oil industry. By far the biggest spender. Bipartisan, you're working for pharma. But starting with food, I learned early on that the food industry, and this is my construct, the food industry and the processed food industry was created by the cigarette industry. And I think this is very telling. It's something I learned. So in the 1990s, the 2 largest food companies in the world were R.J. Reynolds and Philip Morris. What happened is when the Surgeon General way too late in the 1980s said cigarettes were maybe problematic, these were some of the largest companies in the world with the largest cash piles of any company in the world. So what they did is they used their cash piles to buy food companies. We think about the 80s as the Wall Street era M&A, a lot of deals. The 2 biggest M&A deals up until 1990 in world history were cigarette companies buying food companies. So you had in the 90s, these 2 cigarette companies very strategically do 2 things. They shifted their thousands of scientists who were experts at making cigarettes addictive to the food department. So we had the rise of ultra-processed food where our food now is a science experiment. The second thing they did is they shifted their lobbying. So the cigarette industry, of course, was the biggest, lobbying spenders and had a good playbook. They shifted their playbook on lobbying and rigging institutions of trust to food. So they created the food pyramid. So the cigarette industry, through the food companies they bought, paid off the FDA, the USDA, Harvard to create reports saying sugar doesn't cause obesity. And they lobbied for the food pyramid in the 1990s, we all remember, which said, animal-based fats are bad, carbs are good. Remember, carbs and sugar were basically the base of the pyramid. So the American diet, because of that, because we trust our medical institutions, which they know, we shifted our diet significantly to ultra-processed food. It was very intentional, the food pyramid. That was a ultra-processed food marketing document that carbs were fine, sugar was fine. And that shifted, and you look at dietary patterns. Today, a child diet is 70% ultra-processed food. Now, what does that mean, right? Those are literally foods invented by the cigarette industry to addict kids. Obviously we've got sugar, but there's thousands of different ingredients and science concoctions that scientists work in a lab to make it more palatable, to make it more addictive. So food consumption, calorie consumption has skyrocketed. And the byproduct of these toxic ingredients that the cigarette industry I watched and helped with this, bought off the USDA, bought off the FDA, is they wreak havoc among our cells. The foundation of our diet is ingredients that we aren't biologically made to eat, that didn't exist 100 years ago.